Hi, welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover. I'm Leslie Ann Murray. Today we have the lovely Angie Cruz. And we're going to be talking about her book, How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water. Angie Cruz is the author of How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, Soledad, Let It Rain, Coffee, and Dominicana, which was shortlisted for the Women's Prize and a Good Morning America book club pick. She's an associate professor in English at the University of Pittsburgh. Angie, welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover.
Thank you for having me, Leslie.
Tell us about your book.
Well, the book is called How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water, and it's about Cara Romero, who is 56 years old and has been laid off from work during the Great Recession after working in the same factory for 25 years. And she has to start over. So the book is written in 12 sessions where she's meeting with a job counselor through this program called the Senior Workforce Program. And by being asked questions about toward looking for a job, she's actually telling her life story.
Cara Romero is my new literary favorite character because she's a contradiction. And I love characters who are contradictions, right? She's full of grace, full of beauty, but then she says things that are really cringy. And you're like, whoa, you shouldn't say that. But I love it because it shows like all of her humanness. Why was it so important to paint such an important picture of Cara?
Cara Romero came to me. Her voice came to me very strongly. I decided to make it during the Great Recession. I was interested in the many women that were working class women, particularly in New York City, who never were able to obtain long-term employment. I was interested in how they started over. And as I was getting to know her, I understood, like any other character, that no one is just one way. Some people appear to be one way. Some people say things and then act totally in opposite of the things they say. And for me, the practice of like writing Cara was really one of listening, right? Like listening to her and thinking, okay, you are doing some things that I am totally against myself, but at the same time, you're kind of an amazing person for what you're doing for the community. And I think that, you said, oh, it's a little cringy to hear her say certain things. And I think like in some ways, I didn't know that I was also doing this, but I think I was pushing back against the ways that so many of us, maybe it's because in text, we're so curated and we could double check what we say, or we could leave a voice text and then correct it. And, all these ways that we now always are correcting ourselves. Like, I think that Cara is not correcting herself. She's speaking candidly and honestly, and at least what feels true to her. And I think it's refreshing.
I want to talk about the structure of How Not to Drown in Water. You choose to tell the story through the job counseling sessions. Cara must go, and the voice is all hers. To me, it reads like an unedited interview transcript. Why did you decide to tell it this way?
Yeah. So, I wrote the book in many different versions, but the first draft was me asking Cara job interview questions, like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And her responding candidly. It was very funny because while I was working on this book, I would ask these questions to random people. I would say, what is your strength? And, when you ask, anyone, at least in my neighborhood who was willing to answer, they were like, what do you mean what's my strength? I'm a strong person. Punto final. That's it. Like there was like, I don't need to, or what is your weakness? I don't have a weakness. And I just thought it was very funny. And I said, what would it look like if they actually were given 30 minutes to answer that question? How would they move around that? And I do think that one of the things about these sessions and doing it in monologue is that it sort of forces the reader to have a sustained conversation with someone they might not necessarily have a conversation with. Even, myself, I would say that I don't spend 30 minutes listening to my grandmother or my aunts, in the ways that I should, like our time with, with all our people that we love is precious. but we're so busy trying to get to where we're going. Everything is task oriented. What do you need at the store? You're always moving around doing errands. And I think for Cara, like having the monologue with this exquisite listener who is her job counselor allows her to tell her story and then also like make connections by herself about what she might have been able to do differently, which is, some of the benefits that therapy can do if you have a good therapist. But again, like, I don't know that many people that do go to therapy, like Gara, right? Who would, one, have the resources to do it, the money, the time, right? But also it's so stigmatized in our community. So, but then I thought, like, are the tarot workers, are the psychics, are the people in social work, like, what if they were all part of this, allowing people to tell their story and piece together their lives so they can move forward in a more, healthy way?
Okay, so during her sessions with this counselor, she's always saying, I don't share so much. I don't talk so much. But she has like this great connection of family and friends that she's always taking care of, but she's not sharing to them. And she's with this person who she doesn't know, but she's giving her whole life story. And I wondered, like, why? Why does she feel so connected to finally be intimate with someone?
Well, I think that, in my experience, it's interesting what strangers are willing to tell someone than they would tell to the people that are implicated in some of the things you would say. So, of course, she can't talk to her sister about mothering. Of course, she can't talk to Lulu about her son, who they're obviously in competition with, because it's so painful. It's so painful. And I think that, a lot of people communicate in a way that when you do try to say anything, we become defensive. And then, we attack. We have, a lot of communication styles that are not around really trying to hear what the other person is saying and sort of accepting where they're coming from. So I think that it's not encouraged, right? But what I do think does happen, and I actually wanted to center that in the book, is that, I use a word called desahogo, which is desahogar is like to undrown from the inside. And it's a space that I think that they have, Cara, Lulu, Angela, where they have each other and Nang, where they could come to each other's kitchen and just sit with each other and grieve or cry or eat together. And that also is a kind of communication, even though you're not telling your story. You could understand a person's story by the way they're not eating or cooking. And I feel like those languages are really sophisticated in spaces where it's difficult to say the thing directly. And we could also be better translators at what those things are.
It also reminds me of that, like, we all have those aunties or those friends who takes on everyone's burden, but we never reach out to be like, wait, auntie, how are you really feeling? How is everything really going with you? And she takes on a lot of people's burden because I think that's who she intrinsically is. Mm-hmm. But I think she's deeply afraid of like sharing it.
Yeah. And I mean, there is a celebration of strength in Black communities. And I think that, in our communities, like, to be strong means to not show emotion, to not succumb to to some of the things that are really difficult, and to admit, like what they think is weakness, to accept help, to ask for help. And I think that that's a real struggle. And I feel like part of the work the book is doing, and again, I didn't do it consciously, but it's something I actually believe, is that I had to work really hard to ask for help and to accept help in my life, because the models that I had were about, you have to do it all on your own. And, when we know we're not doing it on our own. So I think in some ways the book is celebrating how we're actually taking care of each other, and progress is about community care. It's not about self-care. It's really about community care and watching out for each other.
Yeah, I want to talk about the community care because that's like essential for all of their survival, right? This community, it's just like everyone's taking care of each other. Everyone's looking after each other. No one is alone. Like, I think in the West, we love this idea of like, we're lonely, we're individuals. But here's like, you're in this book, it's like, you're not going to survive if you are an individual. And why was that important to highlight?
Well, I mean, I think in general, nobody survives as an individual. I mean, I think that, white patriarchal structures make believe that they're not benefiting from nepotism, family connections, relationships, generational wealth. All of it is in some ways called community care. And the fact that we even have to say things like self-care and community care is kind of ridiculous. It means that there's something totally toxic about the way we live, that we need to name the thing that like an active, practice. While I do think that in general, we're really honest with ourselves. Like no one does anything really on their own without help. And I feel like in a struggling working class, it's more transparent because you literally are feeding each other.
I find it interesting about like 10 years ago, we would not see Kara as a character in this book's unique structure in the literary world. And now it is, right? And this book I feel like it's encouraging a lot of writers of color to take risks, because when I was in like grad school in MFA program, I would have loved to see a book like this. And so just first of all, just thank you for being so brave to do something like this. That's all I wanted to tell you. That wasn't a question. That was just like...
I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, when I went to an MFA program, I mean, even my first book, now in retrospect, I said, well, like it was quite bold in the way that I tried to write it. I didn't have a lot of models to tell a story in the way that I thought would work for the many, my friend Nelly Rosario, who's a wonderful Dominican novelist, she says, we live in the multiverse. And I always say, yeah, immigrants live in the multiverse. That's why when we see or read about the multiverse, we're like, oh yeah, that's our reality, right? We're in Dominican Republic, we're in New York City, we're in 2 languages, we're in, what's going on with my mother and my grandmother and my uncles and cousins. Like it really is part of my everyday reality as well. So to write in this kind of what has been pushed in some way through the Iowa model of the individual, the hero that goes on a journey with one obstacle, like somehow has to overcome, and it's like really about his own like self-actualization, or I'm like, wait, have I ever moved without thinking about everyone else around me as well? Like, have I ever made a decision without thinking how this is going to impact everybody else that's moving with me? Not really. Like, I don't think my mother has either. Like, most of her life, she's made decisions based on me and my well-being and my brother's well-being. So how do we put that in fiction, right? These multiverses we're living, the different languages, the different cultures, the different realities. And I feel like, I feel really lucky because, I don't think I could have written this book in this structure 10 years ago. I don't think I had the confidence. And I also don't think I had the opportunity, right? I think, with the success of Dominicana, a lot was freed for me, and the trust of my editors. Like I earned a kind of trust that, but if I would have tried to sell that book by itself before Dominicana, I'm not really sure anyone would have figured out if it had a way in the world. I just don't believe that would be true unless I was a white boy, because I think white boys are allowed to experiment in certain ways that we haven't been. But hopefully now that, if How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water does well and it's supported and the readers pass it on, then maybe now other writers could try breaking the form, the more traditional conventional forms.
What is the most interesting thing you've learned from a book recently?
I'm reading the letters of Italo Calvino. And one of the things that he mentions in the letters is that they were actually writing letters and mailing them. And some of the letters were received months after they were written. And then he would respond and get upset because he didn't realize the letter was sitting somewhere with all this really important information. And what it reminds me is that, sometimes we feel this pressure to respond. Email, Twitters, whatever, like tweets, texts, and how sometimes having time to respond to the people that matter, I don't know, there could be a really interesting quality to the way that we communicate with each other. So I've been thinking about that too, like not jumping and react and responding in a reactive way, but kind of like more in an intentional, mindful way.
Okay, Angie Cruz, thank you so much for joining me on Brown Girl Book Lover to discuss your book, my new favorite book, How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water. I really appreciate this conversation.
Thank you so much, Leslie.
Thank you. Take care.